Okay, members, the meeting now is in public session, and if members are content, we'll just proceed through the agenda. So can I ask members to move on to item number 4, the draft minutes, and they can be found on pages 73 to 78 of your meeting pack. Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting on the 29th of May 2025 are a true reflection of proceedings? Yes.
Great.
Thank you, members. We'll move on now to item number 5, matters arising, and there are no matters arising, so we'll just swiftly move on to item number 6, which is a proposal for a regulation as regards certain market rules and sectoral support measures in the wine sector and for aromatised wine products. I'd just like to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard. And can I refer members to the relevant papers at pages 5 to 72 of your meeting pack? As part of its consideration of this proposed EU Act, the committee agreed to request an initial departmental assessment of impact and invited officials to give oral evidence. An initial assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at pages 67 to 72 of your meeting pack. Can I remind members that in line with agreed processes, the department officials were provided with questions in advance to be answered as part of the oral evidence session, and the questions can be found at page 11 of your meeting pack. Relevant officials were also asked to share their responses in writing before the meeting. However, they have been away on departmental business this week and were therefore unable to provide written responses cleared by the Minister in time for today's meeting. They intend to provide them in the coming days, and we will consider them then at our next meeting, if that's okay, members. In the meantime, officials will give the oral evidence on the assessment of impact they have provided. So can I welcome Alison Chambers, Director of Sustainable Agriculture, Food Development Division, Samantha Swann, who is Head of Poultry Meats, Eggs, Dairy, Hops, Hemp, Wines and Spirits Policy Branch, and Kieran, Coghlan, Deputy for Food Security, Beef, Sheep and Pigs Policy Branch. So can I thank you all coming along this morning. When you are ready, I could ask you just to brief the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here this morning. Thanks for the invitation. I understand you've already received the impact assessment, as you've just referenced, and that also included a link to the explanatory memorandum prepared by DAERA. So the proposed regulation was published on the 28th of March following recommendations made by the high-level group on wine policy. This group was established to discuss the challenges and identify possible opportunities for the union wine sector. The union wine sector is facing a significant crisis driven by a steady decline in wine consumption both within the union and globally. Geopolitical factors and the effects of climate change have worsened the situation. Excess production has put pressure on prices, leaving wine growers with less capital to invest and low financial reserves to weather severe effects and events. After 4 meetings, the group endorsed a document with policy recommendations in December 2024. The recommendations were broadly welcomed by stakeholders and by MEPs in the meeting of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development of the 13th of January 2025. Due to the positive reaction to the recommendations, the most urgent and sector-specific recommendations have been translated into legislative proposals to help the wine sector address the serious challenges it faces and become more competitive on the global market. Subject to EU adoption and the democratic mechanisms contained within the Windsor framework, the proposed amendments to Regulation No. 1308/2013 will make it easier for Member States to address or prevent risk of surplus production capacity by allowing changes to the vine planting rights arrangements, amend rules on the production of lower alcohol wine to improve arrangements for the production of low alcohol sparkling wine, introduce rules to harmonise the use of terms to describe lower alcohol wine and other rules concerning the labelling of wine, and permit the Commission to come forward with proposals to harmonise the rules on the electronic labelling of ingredients and nutrition information on wine. Subject to EU adoption and the democratic mechanisms contained within the Windsor framework, the proposed amendments to Regulation No. 251/2014 will permit the production and marketing of lower alcohol aromatised wine products, bringing them in line with rules for the alcohol-free labelling of wine products. Amendments proposed to Regulation 2021/2115 and EU 2021/2116 will not apply in Northern Ireland, as these regulations do not fall within Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework. And the aim of these amendments is to allow vineyards to restructure to avoid an increase of production, permit producer groups managing protected designations of origin and geographical indications to benefit from support for developing wine tourism, and to increase investment to mitigate climate change impact. Changes to marketing standards rules to harmonise labelling of alcohol-free wine and the e-labelling of wine sector products and measures relating to the marketing of aromatised wine will lead to divergence from rules applicable elsewhere in the UK. However, it is the view of the Department that the impact of this divergence will be minimal, given both e-labelling arrangements and rules for producing and marketing partially de-alcoholised and de-alcoholised wine already exist on the market in Northern Ireland. The proposed changes would not add significantly to the existing divergence, and therefore we consider the impact to be very low and the risk to be low. It's also the view of the Department that no impact is expected because of proposed EU updates to support vineyards and winemakers, as there are no wine producers in Northern Ireland. In view of the crisis the union wine sector is currently facing, the European Commission has suggested that the measures should enter into force as soon as possible, except for the new labelling rules, which need to apply later to give producers time to adapt and allow for the sale of products labelled accordingly to the previously applicable rules until their stock is exhausted. The European Commission indicated the proposed policy measures should be implemented within a coherent national strategic framework to maximise their effectiveness. Member States must evaluate their impact to ensure efficiency, cost effectiveness and long-term benefits. Key priorities include avoiding market imbalances, preserving landscapes, sustaining rural employment and enhancing the competitiveness of vine growers and wine producers. DAERA's assessment is that it is not likely that the proposed amendments would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Since all wine placed on the market in Northern Ireland is moved from GB or imported from the EU or the rest of the world, we do not see that the EU's proposed technical change to harmonised arrangements will add any significant cost to traders. We are only aware of one bottling operation for imported wine in Northern Ireland, and hence most wine arrives pre-bottled from Great Britain, EU or the rest of the world. It is not considered likely that the proposed regulation would have a significant impact on UK internal market movements. This means that qualifying goods would continue to move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland via the NERM scheme, without having to meet the new requirements. Products intended to be marketed in the EU or moved under non-Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme arrangements to the market in Northern Ireland will need to adapt to the new harmonised arrangements, but DEFRA does not anticipate that this will cause major problems or add significantly to costs. Moreover, in line with the UK Government's commitment to ensuring Northern Ireland traders have unfettered access to the rest of the UK internal market, these measures would not have any impact on the movement of qualifying Northern Ireland goods to Great Britain. Such goods would also continue to benefit from the market access principles set out in the UK Internal Market Act 2020 and enjoy unfettered access. No formal consultation has taken place across the UK at this stage. The European Commission did not conduct a public consultation nor an impact assessment on the amendments before they published the proposal for a regulation. The costs and benefits of the initiative will be assessed in a staff working document to be published within 3 months of its adoption. On the 7th of April, the Commission opened an 8-week period of consultation until the 2nd of June via the Have Your Say portal that UK stakeholders were able to respond to. A total of 23 responses were received by the Commission's closing date. No responses were received from UK or Irish stakeholders. Stakeholders broadly welcomed the Commission's proposals with very few concerns about the technical changes which will apply in Northern Ireland via Regulation number 1308/2013 or Regulation number 251/2014. Concerns raised from respondents included the terms used to describe low alcohol wine could be confusing or ambiguous. Several responses remarked that the term alcohol light could also be taken to refer to nutrition or sugar content. Other concerns included calls for an exemption from labelling requirements for EU wines exported to third countries, clarification that mandatory particulars need only appear once on the label, and a request for a clear transition to the new regulations. Feedback was presented to the European Parliament and Council and updates have been made to reflect the above concerns with the aim of feeding into the legislative debate to come. So that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Alison. I'll have Steve and then David.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Just for confirmation, sort of things like Nye Timber or sort of Chapel Down, sort of English wines coming into the Northern Ireland market, they wouldn't have to be relabelled.
So if they're moving under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, they're fine to come in as they are, as long as they're staying in Northern Ireland. If they're going to go to the EU, they will have to meet the new EU requirements in terms of labelling. But in Northern Ireland, there's already divergence there. We have difference in our labelling laws already from GB, and that's already happening, and we haven't heard any feedback from stakeholders that it's causing significant problems as is.
Okay.
David?
Thanks, Chair. My question was similar, just on the basis that it's an academic argument, I think, around whether we have bottling or industries here, if really the impact's going to be around the labelling and the goods coming into Northern Ireland from GB. But you've addressed that. Can I ask just then, on sort of following on from that, has there been, I understand there's been opportunities for them to feed in, but has there been a proactive engagement with industry in GB that would serve Northern Ireland to see if they, if they have any response to that or if they have any concerns? I understand that they may not, but has there been an outreach to them?
I'm not aware if DAERA has had outreach to them. They have stated in their explanatory memorandum that they don't think it's going to cause issues for GB-based companies. Okay. They did have the opportunity to...
is that specific to GB companies trying to serve Northern Ireland, or is that just in general?
In general, but
okay.
Those will be serving Northern Ireland as well as the EU. So if they're serving the EU anyway, they're going to have to adapt to meet these, whether it's in place in Northern Ireland or not. They're still going to have to adapt to the EU regs. They did have the opportunity to respond to the EU Have Your Say consultation, and there was no responses from UK. Yeah.
Oh, that's fair enough. I'm just conscious in all of these things that depend. These will be different sizes of companies, and some of them will have the ability to have public affairs operations to monitor this stuff, and others will not. And so I think sometimes a proactive, I guess it comes down to, and I think it's probably shared around the table, that not always convinced that the UK government's engagement around this is much more than a desktop exercise. So I think sometimes it just requires... Can I ask, just curiosity, what portion of wine supply from GP to NI currently goes through the movement, or the NI retail movement scheme?
We don't have the figures on it because it would involve checking the packers list, so it would cause disruption to obtain those figures.
Okay. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yes, I was just following up there from David's last question. Obviously, the key issue here is the labelling requirements, and does that therefore impact the flow of trade and goods from GB into Northern Ireland? Do we have any grasp at the amount of trade that accounts for in terms of wine supply to Northern Ireland vis-a-vis the European Union?
We don't have the numbers in terms of trade. It's not something that's captured within the department.
Okay, so following on from that, and then with David specific, you've no indication even roughly or grasp of how much wine is going through the internal market scheme, and that which is not, or finding difficulties to access that scheme? Because obviously that's going to be the nub of the question here, because if there is already GB suppliers that feel that they can't access that scheme, the new requirements with labelling perhaps could make that worse, and I'm trying to just identify how successful that has been.
So we don't have the numbers for the goods moving, because if it's moving under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, in order to get that you would need to check the packing lists for every individual lorry that's coming in. But I suppose it's worth mentioning that there's already different labelling requirements in Northern Ireland than there is in GB, and this is kind of just an update to that rather than something that's newly diverging. And we haven't had any feedback from stakeholders that current divergence is causing any issues.
When did those did those differentials that are already in place come into effect? How long ago?
2021.
2021, and did we notice anything in relation to trade patterns with traditional supply chains with GB?
No, there was no issues recorded from stakeholders on that.
Okay, you mentioned earlier for those that want to access the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, they have to therefore satisfy that it's not moving beyond Northern Ireland into the European market. So if an English bottle of wine per se ends up in one of our supermarkets, which is accessible to those on a cross-border basis, would that wine theoretically not be able to go into the movement scheme because it could be accessed by consumers in the EU?
So it would just be if it was moving via the company. So if they were sending it to Northern Ireland with the intention of selling it in the EU, in terms of consumers purchasing that and moving it, I don't think that's going to cause any issues.
Yeah, so just that's important clarity. So the company supplies the supermarket, it's on the shelf in Northern Ireland. If consumers from the Republic of Ireland access the supermarket to purchase that bottle of wine, that does not discount it from being included within the internal market scheme. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Alison, Peter?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your evidence this morning. I have more just a sort of technical question, which is on the impact assessment. Just in terms of your evidence, it says the European Commission did not conduct an impact assessment in view of the urgency to act to respond to the pressing challenges. I was just wondering, more from my own knowledge, are the impact assessments from the Commission, are they optional or mandatory, or did they, you may not be able to answer this, or was this viewed as exceptional? I don't know if you can answer that one or not.
I think this was viewed as exceptional because of the urgency and the issues that's in the wine sector at the minute. They wanted the rules to come in as quickly as possible.
Okay. So the Commission can, if it wants to, not conduct an impact assessment. Again, this is, I know it's deaf reference. If you're not sure, it's fine.
I think I would need to check
That's fine.
the process of it.
Could you get back to us just to see, just more for my interest? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Peter. Any other questions? Okay. Well, just on behalf of the committee, can I thank Alison, Samantha and Kieran for your presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
None the wiser.
Members, from the evidence presented this morning, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposed Replacement Act as it progresses through the EU legislative system? David? Yeah.
Sure, I would propose that we continue to monitor. Understand that they're saying that thoughts are that it's low risk, but we've heard that they'll be considering the labelling requirements and so on. I think we should keep a watch on.
Yeah, I think all members are in agreement, so we will continue to monitor the agreement and maybe seek agreement to request that the Department provides a revised assessment of impact if any changes to the Act are proposed by the Council of the EU or the European Parliament, which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. And likewise, that RAISE is asked to monitor the progress of the proposal and submit quarterly updates to the committee. Members also should note that the DSE can decide to hold an inquiry at any time in the proposed Replacement Act that it is monitoring. Okay.
Chair?
Yes, Jonathan?
There was one point that was mentioned by the department, and I actually probably have never heard this one before, whereby they can't supply us with certain information for fear that it will disrupt the supply chain as it currently is in terms of getting the statistics we need. Is there any way for us to dig further on that? It seems very punitive that we can't get that information for fear of it disrupting current supply chains.
I think we could ask the department to review and give us further clarity on what are the issues that information isn't becoming available?
Yeah, I think that the 2 points that were raised were, what is the volume of wine trade with GB to Northern Ireland? And also, I think David had raised specifically, what's the proportion of that that's flowing through the retail movement scheme? That would be important for clarity.
Yeah, no. I think all members are in agreement. Yes, Jonathan, we will do that, yeah, with the department.
Just to clarify the action for us to take away. So we write to DAERA and ask those specific questions and maybe ask for further information on what barriers they might have in obtaining those figures. Does that sound appropriate to everyone?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, yes, yeah. Peter?
Chair, just again to the procedural, I'd be just quite interested in, and it may not be for DAERA to answer, but it did raise that question in my mind about the impact assessment and whether that was, in terms of the Commission, whether that was optional, mandatory or exceptional, and what are the rules around that. It may not be, I'm sure the official could probably find it out. If we get an answer, could that be put in the table of papers? Is that the sort of thing? Or how do we get that back, Chris?
So we will be considering written answers from DAERA on this anyway at our next meeting, so likely after recess. After this meeting, we will remind them of this specific ask, and presumably it will be included in that or separately.
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Okay, members will now move on to item number 7, which is a proposal for a regulation amending regulation 2023-1542 as regards obligations of economic operators concerning battery due diligence policies. Can I refer members to pages 81 to 131 of your meeting pack and remind members that the committee was notified on the 29th of May of this proposed replacement EU Act. The British Government's explanatory memorandum on the proposal can be found at pages 127 of your meeting pack. And I'm just going to invite Chris just to give some further information.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, this notified proposal amends an existing regulation which currently applies under the framework, often referred to as the European Batteries Regulation. You might note from the EM that's there that the Batteries Regulation sets out various conformity requirements for batteries being placed on the EU market. This proposal that has been notified to the committee would simply push back the upcoming application of a number of provisions within it so that they would kick in 2 years later than what's originally stated in that regulation. Members might recall that we looked at a similar notified act in relation to deforestation earlier in the year. The key point here is that this proposal is obviously moving quite quickly through the EU system, and in light of the deadlines that it's seeking to push back, one of which is in August, we would expect it to be published and notified over the summer recess. Normally with notified proposals, we would at this stage just request legal and departmental evidence on the text of the proposal and consider it at the next appropriate meeting in order to consider whether or not to monitor, as we've just done in the previous proposal. But in light of the timings here, we may well only be turning to this Act once again once it's published and notified. That being said, members might wish to continue with requesting our legal and departmental evidence just as normal, on the basis that we would essentially be kickstarting those relevant legal and departmental processes in advance of a possible notification over the summer. If members are still content to proceed on that sort of normal basis, the only caveat we might wish to add is when we're making those requests, we could flag that we may well need to supersede them with a request in relation to the published text instead. But I'll leave that, Chair, to yourself and members to consider the options there.
Steve?
Yeah, Kieran, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the briefing, Chris. Look, it's been kicked out for another 2 years. We're asking Reyes and everybody else to do an awful lot of monitoring, and it's going to be kicked out for 2 years. I think it's probably something to do with the whole issue around sort of EV vehicles and the rest of it, so it's probably going to be kicked out further. So I would propose that we look at it again when it actually gets formally notified, because I'm just very conscious of what we're asking our very limited team to do, and there's a lot more quite hefty stuffs coming down track as well.
Sure. So the likely outcome either way is that the next time we come to consider this will be when it's formally notified. The option would be in advance of that, essentially to let legal and departments know that this is coming down the tracks, and therefore ask them to start preparing their papers. We could add the caveat that, look, we're probably only going to look at this when it's published text anyway. Alternatively, we can simply, if members would prefer, we could simply wait and just make those requests when the text is published. But it might just assist legal and departments to make the ask now ahead of time.
Just through the chair, I've got a more than a sneaking suspicion that we'll go 2 years and it'll be extended another 2 years out. So again, I'm very conscious of us buying up precious resources and teams being involved in this, because it all takes a finite amount of work. So I think when it gets notified is what I would propose. We would look at it when it comes up then, because I don't think we're going to be looking at it in 2 years' time. It'll be further down the stream.
Worthwhile just maybe clarifying on that. On current indications, we would expect that the text that's doing this initial 2-year delay will be published this summer, and we will be notified and have to take a decision at that point on whether to hold an inquiry this summer. So it's maybe a matter of weeks. If the preference there is still, look, we'll just make the request when it's notified. Certainly we can proceed on that basis.
David?
Can I suggest, which I think what Christopher's saying, and I understand what Steve's saying, but that we go ahead, as Christopher has suggested, in notifying those that need to be notified, but caveating that we will probably only look at this whenever it's notified, which allows them to decide when they start their work on this. We're not telling them we're going to need something earlier than that, but we're giving them a bit of leeway to say, look, we're likely to be expecting this if you want to start your work now, but we're not going to ask for it until later. So I think that's probably a more reasonable approach to let them decide how they slot it into their schedules.
Yeah, I'm happy with it.
Best left to officials. Let's go with normal practice.
Yeah.
So I suppose, as members contented in line with obviously agreed procedures, legal advice, that we just notify the department at this stage of the requirements of an assessment of impact with the usual time frame of a month, but in order to assist the department and ourselves in the committee.
With the expectation that
there is an expectation. That's
got the caveat there as well.
So members are contented legal services in the relevant departments are informed that they may be required to supersede these requests with ones relating to the published EU Act, in which case oral evidence and evidence will be considered of them latter requests. Okay, these are okay. So moving on now to item number 8 and item number 9 on the agenda. Item number 8 is a proposal for a directive as regards digitalisation and common specifications, and item 9 is a proposal for a regulation as regards digitalisation and common specifications. If members are content, we're going to deal with items 8 and 9 on the agenda together. These are two proposed EU acts which form a package of measures seeking to simplify and digitalise a number of existing EU product conformity assessment and reporting requirements. So item number 8 is a proposed directive. The relevant papers for it are on pages 132 to 259 of the meeting pack. Item 9 is a proposed regulation. The relevant papers for that are at pages 260 to 329 of your meeting pack. So the British Government's EM in relation to both proposals can be found at page 252 of your meeting pack, and the committee was notified on the 29th of May in relation to both of these proposed EU acts. Can I advise members that a decision on whether to monitor relates to an individual act, and it is proposed that the usual initial evidence is therefore requested individually for each. So can I ask members, are they content that legal advice and an initial departmental assessment of impact are requested in relation to the proposed directive with the usual time frame of 1 month in order to assist the committee in deciding on whether to monitor the form?
Agreed.
Members content? Yeah, thank you. And then are members content to take the same actions in relation to the proposed regulation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, members. Can I advise members that the committee will consider whether to monitor the proposal in due course, most likely after the summer recess? So we'll move on now to item number 10 on the agenda, which is a proposal for a regulation on detergents and surfactants and consideration of survey responses. And can I refer members to the relevant papers on pages 338 to 356 of the meeting pack? And just to remind members that this proposal and the next 5 proposals on the agenda have not been notified.
Yeah.
So they each started their legislative passage before the committee was established, and the committee agreed to gather evidence on each in anticipation of a likely notification once published. Throughout May, the committee heard legal and oral evidence in relation to each one and agreed to launch citizen-based consultations on them, each with 4-week deadlines for response. RAISE is also monitoring the progress of each of the proposed EU Act. Can I inform members that the survey on this particular proposal closed on the 29th of May? Survey responses from the London Oil Refining Company and SC Johnson and an emailed response from the Health and Safety Executive can be found at pages 351 to 356 of the pack. Can I inform members that the Council and Parliament have reached a provisional agreement on this proposal. Once formally adopted and published, it is expected to be notified to the committee. We would then need to decide whether or not to hold an inquiry. Once it is notified to the committee by the department, the department will be asked to provide an assessment of impact on the published EU Act. The British Government is also expected to provide it an updated EM after its publication. Are members at this stage content to forward the consultation responses to the department with a request that in its assessment of the published Act, the department highlights any changes in the final text agreed between the Council and the Parliament which alter its initial assessment of the proposal and comments on the consultation responses? Members content, yeah? Okay, thank you, members. Are members content to forward the responses to the British Government and ask that these are considered as part of its assessment of the published EU Act? Okay, thank you, members. We'll just move on now to item number 11 on your agenda, which is a proposal for a regulation on the protection of animals during transport. Can I refer members to the relevant papers at pages 357 to 377 of your meeting pack? Members, during oral evidence from the department officials on the 15th of May, members requested information on the volume of live animal exports and imports between here, the EU, Britain and the South. A response has been received and can be found at pages 369 of your meeting pack. Can I inform members that the survey on this proposal closed on the 12th of June? 2 responses have been received from the USPCA and the Humane Slaughter Association, and they can be found on pages 371 to 377 of your meeting pack. Members, the committee did invite the Ulster Farmers Union to give evidence on this proposal. This was due to take place today. However, the UFU have asked to reschedule until after the recess. Neither the Parliament nor Council have established their negotiating position on this proposal. So this will need to happen before trilogues can start. So can I ask members, are they content that the consultation responses are forwarded to the British Government and the Department? Yes, members, thank you. Can I ask members, are they content that the Department is asked to provide an updated assessment of impact if any changes to the text are proposed by the Council or the Parliament which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist? Thank you, members. We'll just move on now to item number 12, which is a proposal for a regulation on plants obtained by certain genomics techniques and their food and feed. Can I refer members to your relevant papers at pages 378 to 394 of your meeting pack. Members, at our meeting on the 8th of May, the committee agreed to seek clarity from the British Government on whether the proposed EU Act would apply here under Article 13, 3, Article 13.4 or both of the Windsor Framework. A response has been received which can be found at pages 390 of your meeting pack. Can I inform members that the survey on this proposal closed on the 9th of June and 1 response was received from UFU, and this can be found on pages 393 of your meeting pack. Members, just to inform members that trialogues on this proposal began in May. If negotiations are successful, it is expected that the regulation could be adopted and published by December 2025 or early in 2026. So I'd just like to ask members, are they content to forward a copy of UFU's response to the Department and also request the Department that the FSA provide revised assessments of impact if any changes are proposed by the Council or the Parliament which would have a significant negative impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist.
Agreed.
Members, just a note on that one, I think we would make that ask to both DAERA and the FSA if members are content.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you, Christopher. And can I ask members, are they content to forward a copy of UFU's response to the British Government, and also ask them how the proposed EU Act, once adopted and published, would interact with the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act 2023 and secondary legislation made under the Act? Yes, members content, yeah?
Yeah.
Ask what are the implications of the EU-UK reset, in particular their agreement to negotiate an SPS agreement with the EU for the regulatory regime for NGTs in England, Scotland, Wales and here?
Agreed.
Members content,
Agreed.
yeah? And has the EU indicated to the British Government that it considers the proposal to be within the scope of the Windsor framework and therefore may seek to add it to the framework via Article 13.4 following adoption?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you. We'll just move on now to item number 13 on your agenda, members. And this is a proposal for a regulation on circulatory requirements for vehicle design and on management of end-of-life vehicles. And I can refer members to pages 395 to 418 of your meeting pack. Members, at our meeting on the 15th of May, the committee asked the British Government to clarify which specific provisions of the proposal would apply here under Article 13.3 of the Windsor Framework, and therefore be notified to the committee. A response has been received, which is in pages 412 of your meeting pack. Can I inform members that the survey on this proposal closed on the 12th of June and one response was received from British Glass. And this can be found on pages 416 of the meeting pack. The Office for Environmental Protection and the Electric Vehicle Association NI also stated that they would not be making a submission to the consultation. Can I inform members that the Council established its negotiating position in relation to this proposal on the 17th of June. The Parliament is yet to establish its position. The Council's position would insert a new article into the text which states that some provisions of the proposed Act would not apply here. Once published and notified to the committee, further legal advice on the published text will be requested. In the meantime, are members content to forward both the British Government's response and the Council's negotiating position to legal services, and ask legal services to consider these and any subsequent advice? Thank you, members. Are members content to draw the British Government's response and the Council's negotiating position to the attention of the Department and DFI and ask them to provide revised assessments of impact if any changes to the Act are proposed by the Council or the Parliament which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist? Yeah, thank you, members. And we'll now just swiftly move on to item number 14, which is the proposed regulation and proposed directive reforming EU pharmaceutical legislation, and it's a consideration of the survey responses. And can I refer members to relevant pages at pages 419 to 450 of the meeting pack? Members, at our meeting on the 29th of May, the committee agreed to request information from the Department of Health on the implications of GPs, pharmacies and the general public if antimicrobial medicines have to be supplied or sold as prescription-only medicines. And responses have been received, which can be found at pages 445 of your meeting pack. Can I inform members that the surveys of both these proposals closed on the 19th of June? No survey responses were received. However, emailed responses were received from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency and the British Dental Association, and they can be found at pages 447 to 450 of the pack. Can I advise members that trialogues began on the 17th of June? If they are successful and the acts are adopted, published and notified, the committee would be required to decide whether or not to hold an inquiry into each individual act. So can I remind members that the Department of Health has already been asked to provide updated assessments of impact on both proposals when it has more information, and members may wish to consider further actions after those assessments are received, including seeking further views from BDA Peter, you just want in, yeah?
Yeah. If I could, Chair, I'm just looking for members' information on 445. I just want to read out a line that the Department of Health sent in to us. Given the current uncertainty in respect of the final text of this legislation, as demonstrated in the changes to the Council's agreed mandate, and if or how it will apply to medicines authorised in Northern Ireland, the Department cannot be more specific on potential implications at this time. Now, none of this is the fault of the Department of Health. So any of my commentary is not around that. They are being left, given these changes, they're being left in a hideous position where if this is adopted, somehow DOH here will have to work out the implications on about 3 different levels of this exclusion of antimicrobials intended for topical use. Not only at a pharmacy level, but at a GP level, at a hospital level, and the implications for patients. And I think this is absolutely ridiculous and will have really significant impacts for patients, for doctors, and for pharmacies in Northern Ireland. So I'd want to get that onto the record. This is one we will want to watch extremely carefully because it will have big implications, not only for the Department of Health here, and as they have to try and work out this, what is heading towards a mess from the imposition of this particular directive, but also just for people in Northern Ireland and for businesses.
Yep, sorry, thank you. Just to follow on from that, but slightly digging more into the detail, one of the issues with this, it's not just antimicrobials, because it's how they're going to define generics and how they're going to define novel medicines. Those are specifically excluded from I think it was the human medicines adjustment that was made during the recent talks on the sort of the Windsor framework. So actually the human medicines bit, which we were told was answered all these problems, if they deal with antimicrobials generics, which actually is what makes our medicines a lot cheaper than they are in the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the EU, and novel medicines, these are going to be really significant problems. So again, for the record, we need to be watching this very closely, because this goes contrary to what we've been briefed, that the human medicines problem's been solved. It hasn't. It's actually about to come crashing down around us.
Yeah.
David?
I think, sure, that this is just, again, it highlights the needless problems and lack of clarity that the development and imposition of EU law in Northern Ireland without democratic consent of Northern Ireland causes, particularly in our health services and businesses. So, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. So at this stage, can I ask members, are they content that all the responses in relation to the proposals we have just considered are published on the committee webpage, having been reformatted and redacted in order to remove personal information and improve readability on the website?
Can I ask the Chair, are we keeping the Health Committee informed? Because this is going to be a real issue for them coming through. And maybe a note to Philip to say, look, we're looking at this, but you might need to be aware of this. This is going to be a big problem.
Well, I think that's something that we could update and inform.
Yeah, it's just because we did a lot of stuff that basically said we've solved the human medicines problem, but now we're seeing quite clearly that we haven't. So we're into a really difficult position. So I just wonder if Philip.
Yeah, I think there's logic to either officials or chair-to-chair correspondence being issued to appraise them that this matter is under scrutiny by ourselves, and that clearly the Health Committee have an interest in how it progresses.
Okay. Thank you, members. Okay. So that'll be an action from the committee, to the department. Okay, members, we'll just move on now to item number 15. So item 15.1, and it's at pages 453 of the meeting pack, is a response from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to the committee's request for an appropriate departmental point of contact to be identified regarding EU acts related to product safety, such as the proposed regulation on the safety of toys. It indicates that there is no defined departmental owner for this specific proposal. Are members content for me to write back to the First and Deputy First Minister to thank them for the response and acknowledge the position stated, but also reinstate the committee's long-held position that it expects to be told by relevant departments whether or not a replacement act will have an impact as far as a minister's official responsibilities are concerned, regardless of whether the policy is reserved, and ask for that information to be provided in this instance.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, members. We will also publish the response considered in today's pack on the committee's website in the usual manner for the proposed EU acts we're gathering evidence on. So can I ask members, are they content to ask OPSS via the Cabinet Office to respond to the questions the committee previously sent to Solace and confirm whether OP, the Office of Product Safety and officials, would attend the committee to give oral evidence? Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Just to let members, remind members that the committee did agree to take a number of steps, including launching a citizen-based survey when the proposal's provisionally agreed text became available. It became available on the 12th of June, and the survey is now live. Updates from Solace, legal services and the British Government have also been requested. I'll just move on now to item number 15.2, and that's at pages 461 of your meeting pack. And it's correspondence from the Clerk to the Assembly and Executive Review Committee in relation to cross-cutting executive strategies. Our members contend to respond by noting that the information requested sits outside of this committee's statutory remit.
Agreed.
Right, thank you, members. Items 15.3 to 15.8 are copies of correspondence from the British Government to the House of Lords Scrutiny Committee. Item 15.3 at pages 466 of the meeting pack relates to the Regulation 2024-1860 on the gradual rollout of Udimate. Can I ask members, are they content to note that correspondence?
Just for our, Sir Chair, it's interesting because again, here are other areas in the medical device world that is beginning to fall outside where we were with the sort of supposedly told where we were the whole human medicines piece. So I think it might be worthwhile us just keeping an overview of that as we go through, because again, we're beginning to see sort of, it's not just medicines, now we're looking at medical devices are beginning to fall out of that pattern.
Hey Steve, yeah, thank you.
It's a polite way of saying I'm not quite sure what it meant, but you know, I know we need to have a good look at it.
Okay.
Steve, are you content? So at the minute we're getting rolling correspondence coming in on those.
Yeah,
You can
I
proceed
think
with that.
But there's a definite pattern here we're seeing between both the sort of generics, novels, antimicrobials, new medical devices. There's a whole raft of things that are, you know, previously the assumption was that we're all covered within the agreements under the Human Medicines Agreement that been made between the UK and the EU earlier on this year, and it's shown it's not.
Okay, we move to item 15.4, and that's at pages 471 of your meeting pack, and it relates to a Commission delegated regulation on effective and safe use of veterinary medicinal products. Are members content to note at this stage? Yeah. And then item 15.5, it's at page 476 of your meeting pack, and relates to EU Regulation 23-2411 on the protection of geographical indications for craft and industrial products. Are members content to note? Okay, thank you. Item number 15.6, and it's at pages 480 of your meeting pack, and it relates to Regulation 2023-1252, establishing a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Are members content to note? Okay, thank you, members. Item 15.7, it's on pages 484 of your meeting pack, and it relates to a proposed EU regulation on the welfare of dogs and cats, which this committee is currently monitoring. We heard evidence from the Department of Agriculture and Rural Environment and Rural Affairs and consulted stakeholders in October. The response highlights the department's recent animal welfare pathway. Our members content to ask the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs for an update on domestic policy in this area and its potential interaction with the proposed EU Act. Yeah, okay.
That's right, Chair, I should have made a declaration of interest. I've got both my cats microchipped, so there we go.
And I have a dog.
But it's not.
That's noted, Steve, and that's also noted, Peter. Thank you.
We've got best to be honest about this sort of thing, Chair. You know.
Yeah. Oh, we get hauled in front of the commissioner.
Yeah.
We'll move on now to item 15.8, and it's on pages 488 of your meeting pack, and it relates to the Regulation 2024-1143 on geographical indications for wine, spirit drinks and agricultural products. Are members content to note? Okay, thank you, members. Item 15.9, and it's on page 493 of your meeting pack, is a copy of correspondence from the House of Commons NI Affairs Committee to the British Government regarding the Joint Committee's exchange of views on the EU Artificial Intelligence Act and the EU Cyber Resilience Act, and also the recent UK-EU Summit. Are members content to note?
And sorry, Chair, just for the record, the issue with this, of course, is the fact that we've now got a digital border development in the Irish Sea as well as a sort of a trade border.
Can we now move on to item 15.10 at page 3 of your table pack, members, is correspondence from the Federation of Small Businesses, enclosing its report following a survey of the views of businesses in relation to the Windsor Framework. The Federation of Small Businesses has offered to meet with the committee to discuss the report. As a reminder, myself and the Deputy Chair did meet with the FSB earlier in the year and discussed the role and remit of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee. The report makes a number of recommendations related to the implementation of the Windsor Framework, including around guidance for SMEs and changes to the Trader Support Service. Just in line with the committee's agreed approach for dealing with correspondence of this nature, members may wish to forward both the report and the accompanying correspondence to the relevant statutory committee, noting that the Democratic Scrutiny Committee's statutory functions relate only to the examination and consideration of the new EU Acts and Replacement Acts. David, I'll let you in there.
Chair, I think the report is relevant to our considerations. Particularly when we've talked about how some of these small businesses don't have their own public affairs operations, and I think on that basis the FSB's engagement and work on this is to be commended, and we often criticise those who don't engage with us, and I think the FSB's work in this area is very worthwhile. Yeah. I think in general consideration of some of the things that come forward to us, and in trying to establish what is significant and what has a significant impact on the people and businesses of Northern Ireland and what doesn't. There's a lot relevant in this report, so I would suggest that it might be worthwhile bringing the FSB to committee to present the report.
Yeah. I would agree with them.
Yes, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. I would agree entirely with David. You know, the report is quite damning. It's also a clear contradiction of promises that were made and how businesses feel that they've been shortchanged in regard to that. The FSB is a key stakeholder for the committee, particularly as we've struggled to really gain the views and understanding of local businesses in how this committee operates and its statutory functions. They've also been on record before talking about their difficulties engaging with the committee due to the timescales. So I think it would be absolutely of necessity and appropriate for the committee to hear from the FSB so they can enlighten us on their report and other issues that they have felt that their stakeholders are having difficulty when engaging with this process.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any other comments?
Sorry,
I agree.
Declan, go ahead.
I think that we need to have an open door policy in relation to all stakeholders. FSB is one stakeholder. It's not the authoritative or the most representative stakeholder, but it is an important voice and we should hear its perspective.
Okay. And Steve,
just a quick one. Lord Carlisle, because I think they've just about finished gathering their evidence, can we just drop them a note just to make sure they've got hold of the FSB report?
Yes. Anecdotally, I believe they might have discussed it.
I do. It's just so that show that we're being joined up about this. I think would be useful.
Okay. Thank you, members. I think we all agree. FSB are an important stakeholder, and we commend the work that they have undertaken. And all members agree that we will write back to them, obviously clarifying what our remit is. But likewise, we welcome any opportunity to meet with stakeholders and we can do a follow-up meeting. And then likewise, as Steve has mentioned, we'll also ensure that the report is forwarded to Lord Carlisle.
Just make sure they've got it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, members. Just move on now to item number 16, Chairperson's Business. Item 16.1, and it's a page 497 of the meeting pack, is a request from Net Company for a meeting with me on the Trader Support Service. As with the previous item, in line with the committee's agreed approach, members may wish to forward their request to the relevant statutory committee and advise this organisation accordingly, noting that the Democratic Scrutiny Committee's statutory function relates only to the examination and consideration of the new EU Acts and Replacement Acts. Are members at this stage content just to forward this to the Committee for the Economy and advise Net Company accordingly at this stage? Thank you, members. Item 16.2 at pages 499 of your meeting pack is a report on the Committee's visit to Westminster and Brussels. The report summarises the Committee's engagements, which sought to further develop relationships with relevant scrutiny committees in the British Parliament and to explore the 2025 European Commission Work Programme. Just to inform members that thank you letters will issue to those who meet with us, and the Secretariat will revisit options for future engagements in the coming months. And I'd just like particularly to thank the team and also Shelley for organising the visit and the meetings. I think we had a very packed agenda. I found it really, really useful with the level of engagement that we did have, both within the House of Lords, the NI Scrutiny Committee, and then the range of committees that we had discussions with. I'm going to open to the member who did attend, both Jonathan and Emma, if they have any other comments they want to make. Yes, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would echo your comments, particularly towards the staff and the significant programme that they put together, particularly in the European Parliament. It was back-to-back meetings and certainly engaging to further understand the processes behind how the Northern Ireland Bureau in particular are feeding in our concerns or listening to what's being said at the committee. So I find that all very, very useful and helpful. I suppose I was disappointed in terms of what the Westminster visit due to the lack of knowledge and understanding from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee regards the committee. I did find that quite worrying. On the counter to that, I found that the Lords Subcommittee was very much over the detail, and I thought that following up from that meeting, there is a lot of synergies there going forward that this committee, and indeed in conjunction with the Lords Committee, can certainly perhaps hold this process more accountable going forward. So that was my observations, but again, just to relay to the staff, a super programme, well much. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan?
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose like it's been well covered. It's just the appreciation to the staff who did a really good job, both in organising the trip and everything ran smoothly, and also then like even in terms of the meetings and the background that both Christopher and Sinead were able to provide was really helpful. So just to put that on record, everything ran so smoothly. Shelley had her passes for each day, even in order of the trains that we were getting. So it was all really well organised, and thanks for that.
Chair, can I ask a question? It's actually a question for Emma. Did you see much change from our first visit?
What do you mean in terms of?
Was the European Parliament more spun up, and where they were ready more for legislation and the rest of it, and was aid?
We heard that very clearly from MEPs that there was a change even in attitude, obviously post-election.
Yeah.
And the change in the political vibe that's there, which obviously from my perspective is worrying. But no, the engagement was good.
Okay. And well recommended to keep the process going?
Yeah.
Good.
So are members content to note the report then and take up the following actions outlined within it, which was namely writing to the British Government to request clarity on which parts of the proposed regulation regarding compulsory licensing would be within scope of Article 13.3, and sharing a link to the EU Single Market Strategy with both RAISE and TEO.
Yep.
Thank you, members. So item number 16.3 relates to recess arrangements. Can I remind members that the committee has in the past worked on the principle that it only needs to meet during recess in order to carry out the necessary statutory business where statutory timelines apply. Are members content to proceed on that basis for the upcoming summer recess? And just to remind members, if they could inform the Secretariat of the dates they are on leave and whether they wish to nominate substitute members. Members, just to inform members as well, that a proposal has also been included at pages 51 to 54 of your table pack papers to pause notifications around the bank holidays in July and August, so that members would only have to meet on those specific dates if the committee was holding an inquiry at that time. Are members content? Yeah. That I write to the Cabinet Office to request those notifications are not made to the committee on the 10th of July or the 21st of August. Okay, thank you, members. And just to advise members that it is standard practice during recess to delegate authority to the chairperson and deputy chairperson to submit views on releasing or withholding information in any non-routine or contentious freedom of information requests received by the committee. Any such views would be highlighted to members after the recess. Are members content to delegate that authority to both myself and the deputy chair accordingly?
Definitely.
Okay, thank you, members. Just move on to item number 17. Do members have any other business?
Nope.
No, thank you. So just to inform members that as no published acts were notified to the committee this morning, we will not meet next week. However, members may wish to note that a council decision relating to seed inspections in Moldova and Ukraine was published in the official journal on the 20th of June. This was notified to the committee as a proposal back in February 24, and the committee has been monitoring it. The Secretariat sought more information from the Cabinet Office in relation to this, who have stated that the original proposal was notified in the event that it could have been relevant to the committee's scrutiny of acts amending or replacing legislation listed in Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework. Having examined the final legislation, Cabinet Office has concluded that this is not the case. While it does relate to a set of directives listed under Annex 2 to the Windsor Framework, none of those directives are being amended or replaced by the Act in question. Rather, it only amends an underlying previous Council decision and not the legislation listed in the Windsor Framework. Are members content to note? Thank you, members. So members, the next meeting then has been scheduled for Thursday, the 10th of September at 10 a.m. in room 30. However, we may meet before that depending on any statutory business that needs to be undertaken. So just if we don't meet before the summer recess, I'd just like to wish all members a nice summer break and holidays. I know you will still be busy working away in your constituency offices, but and as I say, if we need to meet during the summer, just to remind again, if you can't make it, to please let the staff know that you're nominating who your nominating person is. Is that okay? Okay, thank you, members. The meeting is now adjourned.